This is So Life Wants You Dead, a show that explores the intersection of illness, disability, healing, and creativity. 7 years ago, I was told I would need an emergency organ transplant. Before they put me under, I closed my eyes and imagined myself writing. Now, all these years later, I can say that was honestly what saved me. Well, that and a brand new liver. I'm Nora Logan, and this is a podcast on how looking at death helps you live. Today's show is a conversation I had with my friend Christine Cestaro. Christine and I met working together in late night TV when we were both essentially still children. I asked Christine to interview me so I could share my story in a way that felt dynamic and interesting, rather than just ranting at a microphone for an hour. We talked about how my illness came about, how my community showed up for me during that time, and why I want to make this show. Here's the conversation. Hello and welcome to the first episode of So Life Wants You Dead. I'm your host, Nora Logan, and I'm here today with my friend Christine Cestaro, who will be interviewing me about my story. I'm a liver transplant recipient who had my transplant in 2015, and I'm starting this show to raise patient voices and to talk about disability, about illness, about the truth of what happens when you are hospitalized, when you live with a chronic illness, or have a massive surgical intervention. And so I thought what would make the most sense is to have someone who knows me really well, who was there at the time, to ask me some questions about what my story is. So Christine, you have the floor. Welcome.
Wow. I've never been given the floor before. So I feel like we should just start at the very beginning. I mean, you touched on it a little bit before, but what called you to make this? Like, why do you feel like this is an important thing for people who have gone through it, and maybe for people like myself who completely had no idea what the journey was like until you went through this?
Yeah, I mean, and I used to be one of those people, right? I got sick when I was 28 years old. I had never been sick before in my life. And I suddenly was thrown into this hospitalized existence over the course of 2 years. And I was sick for about 3 years. And I never really considered what it was like to be in that situation. And at the time, being a young person and having had a liver transplant so young, I felt really alone in it. And I started writing about it as a way to kind of dig myself out of the trauma of it, but also just to make myself laugh and to make myself feel less alone and to find community, in the hopes that it would help me find community. And so from that, I was really moved to then start thinking about doing a show where I could speak to other people who have lived through similar situations, who have been in the hospital, who live with chronic illness or who have a disability, and learn how they heal. And a really cool side effect that I found through researching people who I want to be on the show is that so many people have this creative practice that they attach to their illness. So me writing my way through it and processing through just getting words down on paper, I found that other people have a beautiful art practice, or they write music, or they write poetry, or they make visual art and videos. And so it was this really cool confluence of things that happened. And I was like, I have to make a show about that.
Yeah. And I think something like this is going to be really informative, because just having known you, I have learned a ton. But I think before we get any further, everyone's going to be like, well, how did you get sick?
Oh, yeah.
And I think we need just to talk about it immediately, because I think when something traumatic happens, everyone always looks for the why, usually out of a selfish place. I think when something happens, you're just like, well, that couldn't be me. And I think your story is so unique, because it could be anyone.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think, and it's funny you say that, I feel like we've had a conversation about this before, and I definitely talk about it all the time, is like, people ask me what happened in an effort to avoid it themselves.
Yeah, which is insane. Like we have to acknowledge that it's insane, because does it matter?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
whatever the reason, first of all, it's none of your business.
Yeah.
1,000,000%. But also people are so morbidly curious because they're so scared for themselves. And I know I do it too. You read about something terrible and you're like, oh, a person was, hurt on the subway. And I'm like, I don't take that subway.
Yeah.
So I'm fine. We're all just trying to like get another day because of this. We have so much knowledge of all of this news. And I think, from an illness perspective, everyone's looking at it like, I feel so bad for you, but also how did it happen? Because I'm scared it's going to happen to me.
Yeah.
Which isn't fair.
No, but it's human.
It's
right?
human. Yeah.
It's like we want to avoid death as much as we possibly can, or like the possibility of pain.
Like, did you not take a vitamin so I can buy it and then keep going?
Or did you take one and should
I not take vitamins ever again? Yeah, exactly.
So basically at the time I was working with you at the Tonight Show as a production assistant, and we I no longer work there. You still do. I had a hiatus and I went to Indonesia, and that's like when everybody's eyes go wide when I tell the story. They're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, as if that makes it make sense.
Yeah. I'm never going to Indonesia. So I went to Indonesia and was visiting some friends, and I got sick there. And I just thought that, Bali belly, which is where I was in Bali, is really common. Getting food poisoning is really common. And the way that it started was that I started throwing up and just feeling completely bone tired. And I had like another maybe week to go of my trip, and I just got progressively worse. And I also was having insane emotional reactions. Like I couldn't stop crying. At one point I was with my friend and her kids, and we went to get ice cream, and I just like sobbed for 3 hours. It was very strange. And so I went back to New York, was going back to work, somehow wasn't sick on the plane. My body was just like, okay, you're on the plane, just deal with it. And got back to New York and was still getting progressively sicker and sicker.
Worse. Yeah.
And you were there, so you remember. And I wasn't taking myself to the hospital. I did take myself to urgent care.
Yeah.
And I went to urgent care on the weekend after I got back, I guess, because I was very much into my job. I loved it. And I was like, I have to be there. Like
we need to circle back on this. I mean, we'll talk, we have to come back to that because I think it's a way larger point.
Yes.
But yes, definitely. That was definitely integral in how you felt. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll definitely go back. But so I go into urgent care in Williamsburg, and the woman is like, there's nothing wrong with you. I think you just have a stomach bug. And she gave me antacids. Like she literally was like, here you go. Here's some antacids. And I was like, okay, I feel like I'm dying, but
it's important to note that you were fully yellow.
Yes.
At this point.
Yes.
I mean, non-medical professionals would see you and you were yellow.
Yeah. And so I just got some really bad advice basically from various medical professionals. I then went to a very bougie medical practice that I won't name, and, paid the money to be a member at this bougie medical practice because I was like, okay, let me just like get the best care because clearly there's something really wrong. And they were very lackadaisical in their approach to my care. They were like, okay, well, you're going to do a bunch of tests. They did a bunch of tests, like every test that they could do when I'm presenting as someone who has a liver condition with the yellow skin and the vomiting and the lack of appetite, etc. And then none of the tests came back that I had anything. None of them.
Also insane.
Yeah, everything was negative.
I went to the gym before a blood test once, and they sent me to get a sonogram of my liver or whatever. Like,
oh, really?
Immediately. Yeah, they're like, your liver levels are off.
Yeah. So,
like,
very strange.
Failure. Like, this was a consistent failure.
Yes. And the thing that they did show was that my liver enzymes were elevated, but they couldn't diagnose me because I didn't have hepatitis A, B, or C. I didn't have any of those things that they usually test you for. And all the while, I was still going into work, and I was like, what's going on? And I was asking everyone, like, what's happening? I don't get it.
They don't give awards for like chillest person in liver failure, but you would have nailed it.
Yes.
Nailed it.
Yeah. I was just like,
I just don't know what it is. As if it was like a full cold, like a bad cold.
Yeah. I was just cosplaying like a normal person. I was like,
yeah,
I'm cool. I'm good. No worries.
Yeah.
And then finally they did send me to go for an ultrasound at Beth Israel in Union Square. And I remember I went and I had my mother meet me there, who hadn't seen me. Like I wasn't, my family hadn't seen me. And this time frame is like 2 weeks. Like I'm back in New York at this point at fast. 2 weeks. And I go to the sonogram, or the ultrasound rather, and my mother meets me there and she's like, you are fucked up. What is wrong with you? And I get the ultrasound and they're like, oh, it's going to be 48 hours until you get the results. And I was like, I don't know if I have 48 hours to wait. And meanwhile, the people at the bougie medical practice are like, oh, we're just going to wait until you get the hepatitis E results back. And I say this often, but if I had waited for that, I would be dead right now. And at that point, my mom is like, this is bullshit. We get in a cab. We go up to Cornell, Weill Cornell, New York Presbyterian. And I am admitted to the ER. And that's when they were like, you're dying. The first doctor who saw me was like, you're dying. You're an acute liver failure. And that was basically the origin story of my
opposite Avengers.
Exactly.
The concept of time then was crazy, because now you're looking back on it and you're like, yeah, we had to. It seemed like every day was so important. Things were only getting worse, and it all happened so fast.
Yeah. From the moment I got sick to my transplant, I think was less. I can't remember. I think it was like just over 3 weeks or something crazy.
Do you think, like, aside from the medical implications, that like ripping this Band-Aid of going from like the Nora as you knew it to a person who's now going to have to deal with this for the rest of their life, like having this be so fast, how do you think that reflected on you? Like, how did you manage that? Do you think that this was something that, I mean, you can never say one is better than the other, but like the whiplash of going from like this young 20-something, you know, your whole life ahead of you as you saw it, and then having to say goodbye to all of those things, and then, you know, reimagine the next 85 years, you know?
Yeah. Well, actually, my social worker at one point, when I was like circling the drain for like the 4th time, because I had so many setbacks, she was like, I know you're going to live until you're at least 80. And I was like, that sounds like really old. I don't know if I can make it that long.
I don't know. As we get older, though, it
doesn't seem that
I'm going to be in a band when I'm 80.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, I think the whiplash of it was real. Like at the very beginning, I exhibited every symptom of PTSD. I don't really identify with that diagnosis anymore just because of all the self-work that I've done. And I don't feel like I have those symptoms as much, but of course it's like an ever-evolving thing. And I just wasn't prepared in the like that's an understatement. Yeah. But the way that transplant usually works is that people
I guess that's my point, is that like a lot of people, you know, unfortunately spend a lot of time on that list. And here you are going from someone who walks into the hospital as if you're going to go home and answering emails on your phone. And then that starts a whole new life for you.
Yeah.
Like you didn't have 6 months to kind of wrap your brain around this in a slow, maybe a healthier way. I don't know. But, you know, it happened overnight.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like, I'm never going to know because it's just the way that it happened to me, right? Like, I don't know if I would have felt better about it if I had had a year to prepare and been given all the things that they usually give you for transplant, because I literally went in through the back door and it was like, I was trying to stay alive. Like I was like trying to do rituals to keep myself alive. And, you know, getting people to pray over me and all this stuff, like trying to reverse it up until the moment that I had the transplant. So I was like really in denial, but I had such little time to prepare that the denial was like, wait a second, I was in my friend's backyard last week drinking a beer. What the fuck?
Yeah, I don't even know if you can say denial, because
right.
everyone around you was, why would you ever go to that, jump to that? And then also, yeah, you were hearing, like, we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Not your entire life is going to change.
No. And it was sort of, just bad luck, really, of people telling me like, yeah, just wait to go to the emergency room. You'll be fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. And then it suddenly isn't fine. And I'm on death's door and I am completely bewildered. So I think there's nothing that can prepare you for that sort of dramatic thing that happened. And also I'm kind of grateful that it happened in that way, because it's just the way that it happened. So there's nothing I can change. For a long time, I didn't feel that way. For a long time, I felt really hard done by, and like my life had been taken away from me.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the grieving process of like saying goodbye to your old self and now welcoming in this new life? And like, I think about it in terms of like, smaller thing, the death of a loved one, or on a smaller scale, like a breakup. You grieve the future that you thought that you were going to have. But with a disability, with like long-term illness, how do you put a time limit on that? Because this is forever.
Yeah. I mean, and that's,
or is there not, who's to say there should be a time limit on that? But, you obviously have to come to terms with it. And how did that work for you? We're kind of jumping around, but.
That's okay. I mean, I think we should say also that I never got a diagnosis. So, and that's the thing that really freaks people out, is that I never was diagnosed. I just went into acute liver failure, which is actually more common than people think. And so the grieving part was like twofold, really, because I did have to say goodbye to my old life and that person. And also I didn't have an explanation for what was happening. So I couldn't like put it in a neat box that we really love to have as humans. We really like to have that explanation. The doctors hated that there was no explanation. Every single department in the hospital came in to look at me to try to figure it out, and they couldn't. And they even did a biopsy on my old liver, and they didn't get anything from it, although there was only 3 cells of my old liver left at the time. So
didn't you tell me though that there's like a large majority of people who go into liver failure that have the same exact outcome as you? They don't know why. I mean, I think we're trained. It was an alcohol. That's what we see on TV, like an alcoholic that damaged their liver over whatever, however many years, and, regulating whether like, what
it's
that
fine
is.
if
But
you're an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your liver fails. But like this, they just don't know. So everyone kind of, I'm sure there's got to be some sort of assumption, because there's so little like knowledge, I think, especially people our age.
Exactly. And it does happen to people our age more than one might think. I don't know the statistics on it, but I know that it happens. It's a common thing, and people see it. Doctors see it all the time, and people are transplanted in that way. So it's not completely out of the ordinary. It just felt like it was, because I didn't have any idea about it, and no one else in my life had any idea about it. The grieving, they say that it takes 5 years. Did you know that?
They who?
Psychologists. And I really identify with that. Like for me, it took 5 years to, like, I would wake up for the first couple of years and forget that it happened and feel like when I woke up, that it was a nightmare. And then I would like pinch myself and I'd be like, oh, I'm actually in this. This is actually happening. And then the grief of having to like literally build myself up from nothing on a physical level, but then also my identity had to shift completely. I, was on this path. I really wanted to be a TV producer. I really wanted to write for TV. I really wanted to, that was my dream. And I was like trying to make that happen. Yeah. I was there. I was in it. And I had to kind of let go of that. And I held on for dear life. Like I went back, we can go.
You did, yeah.
we can go back to this. But I went back to work 6 months after my transplant. And I look at pictures of myself now And I was emaciated. I looked so unhealthy. And I had, this is a side note, but like I had gone with my friend to get my eyebrows dyed like in February of 2016, right before I went back to work. And I just looked like so unwell. And then I had these like really thick tattooed eyebrows and I looked so weird. And anyway, that's besides the point. But I really wanted to make it work. And then I got sick again going back to work.
But I think it's also important to say there's no roadmap.
No.
You know, this was such uncharted territory that it was kind of like, well, I got to pick myself back up and run back to where I was. Because otherwise, you know, what am I doing?
Yeah.
And you probably felt that urge because like if you kind of stepped back and let go of that, then that kind of opens another door.
Yeah.
And I don't think you were ready to. Then.
No, I was definitely not ready. I really wanted to
None of us were.
stay the same.
Yeah.
Everyone was like, oh, you're coming back to work. Great.
That's great.
And
let's hang. Let's get lunch.
Cool. Yeah. Let's just like pretend that didn't happen 5 months ago or whatever it was. And, you know, I'll be completely honest. Part of the reason I went back so soon after was because of the fucked up insurance situation in this country. Because I was deathly afraid that that I would lose my amazing insurance that I had through NBC. And I felt pressure to do that. And in retrospect, I probably could have waited another couple of months and who knows?
I mean, yeah, the healthcare system and the pressure it puts on a person who's already struggling just to live is absurd. But I mean,
so
we don't have 17 hours.
No, exactly. we don't have to go deeply into that. But
the stresses
keep listening
and the
to
pressure.
The show and you'll hear more about the fucked up healthcare system in America. But yeah, just the pressure in general that I had around not only wanting to stay the same, be the same person, have the same things, keep the same dreams, but also just the pressure I felt around having healthcare and not having an option if I didn't have gainful employment. Other thing I'll say is I really like to drink, you know, like I loved to party in my teenage and 20-something years. And I had to suddenly become sober. And that was really painful. And, you know, I come from a family of addiction and it's a big part of my story. And it's something I hope to talk about on the show. And I'm going to talk about on the show. And having to let go of that quote unquote party girl, even though it sounds silly, because it's like, you're alive. Like you don't have to have a glass of wine.
No, it doesn't sound silly though, because these are all versions of you. Like you had to say at the time you were saying goodbye to your career, even though, I mean, we know that that's not the case now, but in hindsight, but at the time it was the death of a career. It was the death of your social life. It was the death of, you know, the timeline that women of our age feel, because if you don't meet someone and then have the year with them and then be able to vacation right before you have kids, what are you going to do? Like all of those things are kind of converging on it's just collapsing on itself. Yeah. So even though it's like silly, like, I can't have champagne at a wedding. Like it's not the champagne. It's way beyond that. It's what it represents. It's the community. It's the social life. It's all of that stuff. And also like, you might like how if someone told me I couldn't have coffee for the rest of my life. You know?
I was pissed off about it.
I think there's like its own, you know, 12 steps, like the anger, the denial, all of that comes with so many things. Like this one diagnosis has this web of things that you were forced to say goodbye to or change with no warning. And that's really traumatic.
Yeah. And the grief of that like really stayed with me for a long time. And it's still there sometimes. It just looks different now, you know? And like I said, 5 years, I started to feel more like myself. I was surprised that parts of me came back that I thought were gone forever. And I even had to do like some intentional, it sounds crazy, but like I spent a summer in 2019. Thank God I wasn't trying to do this in 2020, but I was like, I need to have fun and remember how I'm allowed to have fun.
Right.
And
it's not all sadness. And I mean, when you live in it, it's really hard to break out of it and remind yourself like, I can have joy.
Yes, exactly. And like, just be kind of reckless. Like to not reckless to the point of risking my life, but just be reckless and let go of some of that constriction that I felt for so long of like, I'm a sick person. I am never going to be able to be out in the world again. I have to just hide.
And the judgment that comes along with it. Like, you're sick, but you're doing X, Y, and Z. Like, all of those stuff, it's magnified when you have a disability or an illness. It's just like, I don't know if you feel like people have extra eyes on your actions. When you were so young when this happened, it's like, yeah, I still had a couple of nights where I didn't want to remember what happened. Like, I had those in me that are now taken away, and I feel like I need to, do whatever it is. But do you feel like there is a judgment? Like, the lung cancer patient who was a smoker, or the liver, person who loses their liver that's an alcoholic, like the judgment that comes with you doing whatever it is.
Absolutely. I'm at the very beginning, and it really pissed me off, and I probably told you about it. People would say to me, "Oh, but you really like to party. Suggesting that I did this to myself." And scientifically, the rate at which my liver deteriorated and how old I was, that would not have been a possibility. That's not...
It's ignorance.
Yeah. But a lot of people suggested it, and it really bothered me at the time. And now I don't care, because it's like, you can think whatever you want. But
I would still throw a truck at someone if they said that to me.
But yeah, no, it's wild. And also, just experiencing judgment of like how I'm choosing to live. Like, if I'm choosing to travel more, or just how I'm choosing to spend my energy, I find that people do have judgments around it, just because I'm supposed to be resting, but I'm also supposed to be living.
Yeah.
Like, that's the whole point.
Spend the rest of your life like on a fainting couch.
Yeah, exactly. And I spend a lot of time on a fainting couch. So.
You do. It's by choice, though, and that's what's important.
Exactly.
I think that's probably an important thing to speak to, is that judgment, because I'm sure a lot of people that are listening feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I think that's the whole reason I want to make So Life Wants You Dead, is I want to be the full spectrum of my humanity and like my humanness. And I also want other people who live with illness or who are in and out of hospital to exhibit the full spectrum of their humanity, because we are still people. We still have personalities. And I think sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle of like, oh, you're just a sick person now. And like, you don't have hopes and dreams and aspirations, and you don't have a full emotional life. You don't have a sense of humor anymore because you're sick.
Right.
That's the reflection that I've felt. And I think it's bullshit.
Yeah. I mean, I think especially with our relationship, that was the one way we were still able to connect. I mean, because you, all due respect, were a shell.
Yeah.
I'm sure just hard, like you were dealing with so many things. To find the person, like to find Nora and all of that was very hard. Yeah. But the only way that we could, see a tiny little speck of light, for us at least, was like the everyday bullshit, like the ramblings, the joking, I think that was our lifeline, where it was just like, oh, okay, like she's in there. You don't have to be gentle with her. Like, you don't have to be gentle with words. Like, we can still talk, even if there were days when you couldn't speak. There were days when most days you couldn't type. Like, we were just talking on voice notes and stuff like that. Yeah. But that was really important. And I think for me too, yeah, your instinct is like, you want to whisper?
Yeah. Yeah.
As if like your ears are like, you just like everything like automatically comes down here.
Yeah.
And you just are like, it's another beautiful day. And,
yeah.
And
it's like that therapy voice.
Yeah.
Like, don't shake anything. Don't make any sudden noises.
Right.
Yeah. I think, and the people I appreciated the most, I mean, I had an amazing community of people around me, from my work people, from my colleagues to my friends to my family. It was unbelievable how people rallied around me. But, everyone was having their own experience of my illness, and it brought up a lot for people.
Yeah. I mean, it was scary.
Yes.
Like, it was very scary.
Yeah. Yeah. But the thing I appreciated the most, and especially with you never treated me differently, and you kept bringing the jokes, which I really appreciated, because the only way that I could survive within it was seeing the humor in the day to day, because
what's the other option?
It was so dark.
It was so dark.
But actually, I'm curious how it was for you, because we've never actually spoken about it, really.
I know, we haven't. We had so many other things to talk about.
I know.
I think we were just so young. So I think the magnitude of something like this did not, like, even when it was really, really, really bad, it was so confusing because you never had someone go through that before.
Mm-hmm.
So that was obviously really hard to, like, see your friend go through something this hard and something that you did not know how to navigate at all. And I think, your immediate instinct is, like we said, is just to be, like, really gentle. And I think you have to be really conscious to not do that, because you're like, this person is so fragile, I'm going to mess it up.
Mm-hmm.
And that time was just so weird. I mean, we can talk about, like, millennials and their jobs. And do you think that we are the last generation, or do you hope we're the last generation that has it programmed into our brains to not literally go into work while we're dying? Like, I think the reason also it took so long is because we were just like, but you go to work, you get up and you go to work. It sounds like we are, like, going to war.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
No, and I should say that I was the office PA, and my responsibilities were sending out a weekly email about pizza. And
let's not downplay the importance of the pizza, though. I mean, to be fair, everyone loved the pizza. We still did.
Yeah. And ordering pens. Like, basically, I mean, I did other things. I won't completely downplay myself, but
you were doing important things. But I wasn't, at the basis of it. It was like
necessary to the functioning of the show. Like, I wasn't like the show would go on without me type thing. And I just was so blind to taking care of myself that I refused to stop for a minute and be like, no, this is bigger than me. This is bigger than my job. I need to take myself to the hospital. I just refused to do it. And I think it was also, like, going back to that grief, I was, like, slowly accepting that I was going to be in this insane grief, on some level, grief for a long time. So I didn't want to let go of it. But in the period of time since that happened, which was now coming up on 7 years ago, I've seen so much change in regards to the cultural conversation around work and how people are taking more rest and they are setting boundaries. And especially in the pandemic, we've seen it so much with the Great Resignation of people realizing that they can't keep living like this because everybody's burnt out and it adversely affects health and it's not a way to live. And I hope that we're the last generation that is programmed in that way, but I still see it all the time in my own impulses and the people around me. So it's hard. That conditioning is deep and it's patriarchal. It's thousands of years old and we're not going to just shake it off anytime soon, I don't think. But I'm hoping that things start to shift in a more restful direction as we get more and more information. And honestly, the sad thing is that more and more people get sick, from stress and from working themselves to the ground. So I don't know. I hope so. But I know that next time, in the next lifetime, when I'm dying, I won't go to work.
You won't be like, hang on, there's not enough paper in the copy room.
Exactly.
I must go. I mean, you did say that, you were conscious of, like, not having, this long-term illness be your personality or people seeing you like that. I think for a lot of us, work was our personality. I mean, I'm a little different now. I got a dog, so having a dog's my personality. But,
perfect.
That was so central.
Yeah.
And it still is, like having a job or whatever it was, or climbing the ladder because you're on this, time,
Mm-hmm.
I think that became such a huge part. Like that was our personality, that it was hard to break out of it and hard to see yourself beyond it. So if like that's your whole world, how do you put yourself above it?
Yeah.
To go to the doctor.
Yeah. And you are in service to this greater goal. And I think especially because, I was 28, now I'm 35. In your 20s, you're like really working towards something. And then they say your 30s are for building, but who knows? I was working towards something that I like felt needed to happen yesterday. So if I missed any time out of that, then the whole thing would fall down. And the joke of the whole thing is that it fell down anyway.
It did. Yeah.
And I was ejected out of the whole thing. So
how do you continue your relationships when you're a different person?
Yeah. I don't know how I did it. And actually, I'm sure I didn't, in terms of like having space for other people. I think
I disagree. I think you had a lot of space. I mean, the year of everything happening is kind of a blur.
Yeah.
So I only kind of think about, us after when it comes to stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that you were always really good at that. And I was always just like, how do you have the patience?
Yeah. It's something that other people have told me, and I guess it's true. But my relationships had to completely change. And a lot of my friendships went through some really painful periods because the magnitude of my experience was so big.
It's huge. Yeah.
That like there wasn't much space for anything else for a long time. And then things calmed down and it was like, whoa, I'm just here by myself. How do I deal with that? And then I went through this whole other iteration of it. And I don't know, I've always been someone that people have come to with their issues and they've come to me for help or just to listen or advice or whatever.
Well, because if you reflect back on like the last 3 conversations that you had with a friend, what are you doing? You're complaining.
Yes.
Which like, I'm working on it. But you're complaining. You're taking very small things. A guy on the train looked at you weird.
Yeah.
You almost tripped.
Yeah.
Someone was rude. And you're sharing all of those, hopefully with, some sort of pizzazz. Yeah. But that's what it is.
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden you have this person that's gone through like the realest stuff that you can possibly imagine. It's got to be tough. And I imagine a lot of people listening who are dealing with these kind of things, maybe they're just going through it. How do you kind of navigate these new relationships? Like, did you address it?
It depends on the person, right? Like I had and have a lot of close friendships and I'm lucky to have those. And with some people, we were like in it and talking about it the whole time and dialoguing about it the whole time. And then with other people, it happened 2 years later. And it was a case of having to rehash stuff that I had already worked through, but they had their own experience of my illness and needed to be heard in that. And I get that. And I don't think that there's a roadmap, there's not a roadmap for any of this. But the thing is, you aren't alone in it. Like people who are going through serious health stuff, odds are there's someone else who's gone through the same thing. Everybody around me, at least, went a little bit crazy. And, in different ways. Like my parents had a really intense experience. My mother really, like she put herself in the hospital. She was so stressed. Like it's another story for another day, but we were in side-by-side hospital beds at one point.
Yeah.
So yeah, for each relationship in my life, it's been different and it's been a journey, for lack of a better word. It really has had to like go through lots of peaks and troughs, and some people did leave my life and I had to mourn that. Like some people just fully are not in my life anymore. And it's not necessarily down to my transplant, but it's part of it for sure. And just like the changes in my lifestyle. And
I mean, it's interesting that, we've been talking for a while now and it's not even about the liver. It is this like ripple effect that, touches so many areas, which I think, what you just said reminded me, I think we have to talk about the vulnerability in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really hard being this very strong, independent, you know, whether you wanted to be or not, you know, that's what we were. And that was our, you know, that was part of our personality. You know, I have my job, I'm supporting myself, I'm having fun. I'm like the New York City millennial dream. And then boom, you have no choice but to go back to, you know, being a kid and relying on your parents, relying on your friends for some really vulnerable stuff.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Nightmare.
It's a nightmare. It was a nightmare. I was living in Greenpoint with a roommate. I did whatever the fuck I wanted. Anytime.
Answered to no one.
Answered to no one. And I was I'm an only child and I was independent my whole life. And it was the most humbling thing I've ever been through. One of my best friends who is an occupational therapist, she was there with me in the hospital a lot. And at one point she had to shower me. Like I was fully naked, swollen. I had become
open wounds everywhere.
Yeah, open wounds, black and blue all over my body. And I didn't shower for like I didn't know that I could shower for a really long time in hospital. Like
my butt's gonna fall off.
Yeah, like they did like you know, bed showers. I'm forgetting the name, but you know what I mean, like spot cleaning or whatever.
I'll tell you what, it's definitely not spot cleaning. They brought out the Dyson and did a once over and it was fine.
Yeah, they put some Tide on me.
A Swiffer wet jet once a week and I was good to go.
I was good. But yeah, there came a point where I really needed to shower. It was after my transplant. And my friend stood there with me, showering me. I was sitting in a chair and it was a situation that I had never been in and have not been in since. And I had to rely on her for her kindness and generosity to show up for me in that way. And that must have been scary for her too, to see me like that and also have to essentially clean me like I was a baby. And I have so many other stories like that of having to rely on my parents who don't like to cook, who did not expect their 28-year-old to suddenly be back at home having all these dietary restrictions and needing to eat 90 grams of protein a day and having like all the...
It's a full-time job for everyone involved.
Yes, it's so much work. And I was someone who really didn't like help. I didn't like getting help. I could do everything myself, like you said, willfully independent. And I just had to surrender to it. I had to surrender to the help. And luckily I had a ton of it. And I'm fully aware still that that's not always the story. I had so much help, not only from my family, but, you know, work showed up for me in a big way. I got so many amazing food deliveries to the hospital from my place of work. And it's a huge lesson in leaning on community. And it's something we've seen in COVID too, of like really needing to be there for each other in this interdependent way. But it taught me how to lean on other people and accept that and be vulnerable in that and allow for that to feed me rather than feeling guilt.
What kind of friendship is like, hey, we're cool as long as everything goes perfectly.
Yeah, no, exactly. And as long as like I'm doing something for you, you have to do something for me.
Yeah, no one's keeping score.
No one is keeping score.
So let's go back to going to the hospital.
Okay.
Let's just talk about that because I feel like that's its own, like being a patient. You didn't just like go to the hospital. That was like your Marriott. Like you were a full-time resident.
Yes.
And that's really hard. I mean, you talked about the food deliveries. Like there are so many small things that you don't think of that are probably very overwhelming for people. So can you talk about just like getting there post-surgery and just realizing that this is now your room and board for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I mean, the whole time at first, at least, I was trying to get out of there, and
you were frequently trying to break out.
Yeah, I did break out once.
That was the second time.
That was the second time around. Yeah, I broke out to go work on a shoot and had like an IV hanging out of my arm. It was the most insane thing, and it was from basically, in retrospect, I had steroids induced mania. So I was like, I'm breaking out of the hospital and this is normal.
Yeah.
And everybody co-signed because everyone was like, okay.
Yeah, okay, she needs it.
But yeah, from the very start, I was trying to get out and they did let me go home, and then I got sick again and I had to go back in. And I dubbed the hospital Club Cornell because it was like my club quarters.
Yeah.
It was the intricacies of being a patient in the hospital when you're there day in, day out. It's like,
I mean, that's how you got here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's like those walls come in on you, and that's just where you have to live out your day. I would just watch the clock and wait for people to come in and out, in and out, in and out.
Fully knowing too that the world goes on. I think that's like a hard part. People are getting on with their lives.
Yeah.
And then there you are feeling like literally and spiritually static.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had you have nowhere else to go. You have your room. And even when, at least this was my experience, when you want to take a stroll around the nurses station, everybody has tabs on you. So like, oh, what are you doing? You're taking a stroll around the nurses station. And I'm like, yeah, what does it look like I'm doing? So it's sort of this constant monitoring. And even if you're gone I didn't leave the hospital, by the way, my hospital room, although I was moved all around the hospital, I didn't leave for 35 days or something. I didn't even go outside to breathe fresh air. So it's really, your world becomes so tiny. And yet for me, that first time round, it was where I was like the most light, I felt like I was experiencing this spiritual awakening in a way. And then of course I came back down to earth, and also it was the painkillers, but
like, yeah, that connection was so important, but also like, yeah, you're looking around and seeing the world continue to turn. Like, how did did that make you feel angry? Did that make you how did you kind of shake that?
It took me much longer than my hospitalizations to shake that, because I felt like everybody was moving on with their lives and becoming more successful, again, with the obsession with success and my job and the rest of it.
Arguably surviving.
Yeah, exactly.
I would have to put that at the top.
But also being in relationships and getting married and having kids and all the rest of it, the things that we're very conditioned to think that we really need in order to be successful. And I was seeing that, at the tail end of your 20s, that's what's happening, and into your 30s. And I felt very stuck still, like there was no movement. And there wasn't really any movement, at least for 3 years in the period that I was extremely sick. And the way that I dealt with it was through grieving, through feeling really hard done by feeling really sad, by writing about it, by trying to make light of it, by trying to see why I thought I was so left behind. What is this conditioning that's telling me that I'm a failure because I just managed to escape death,
Right. But society is sad for me because I'm not married yet.
Right. And my grandmother is asking me why I'm still single.
Right.
So I'm still single.
For me, putting this into my own lens, I lost someone really close to me when I was 19, and no one around me had been through that experience on such a big level. And I felt so angry that I was going out into the world and nobody cared every day. Mm-hmm. That nobody was just feeling these insane emotions, that they were just like other 19-year-old kids going about their life. And I was so mad that the world just kept going around.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember one specific instance. I was really angry for a long time and still am sometimes, but I went out to a concert of a friend of mine, and everyone was there in their lives, a few of my friends. And I was still, it was probably only 4 or 5 months, maybe, I don't remember, maybe 6 months, something around there, when I had gone back to work. And I was just so pissed off that everyone was having a good time and they were cool and they were in their jobs and in their lives, and weren't catering to how completely messed up I felt in my body and my mind. And I acted like a complete asshole that night, to the point where my friend was like, "Are you mad at me?" And I was like, "Yeah, I kind of am." Even though I wasn't mad at her. I was just angry, and I needed the world to know it. I mean, I had a lot of anger. I like shouted at people in the street. And that's not particularly my thing.
That's not really your brand.
No.
But in New York, less weird.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about how things change for you on your outlook? Like, you know, did you have, if people don't know now, they're going to eventually know you are very spiritual.
Yeah.
You are the person who would like go to one of those retreats where they don't speak. Have you been to one of those retreats where they don't speak? I feel like if you haven't, you will be.
Yeah, I'm planning on it. I have been silent. Yes, I have been silent.
What's that like? I have been silent. Yeah, there have been times in my life where I've been silent. So I think that that's important to know, like to get it out. Like that's a huge part of who you are.
Yes.
And, you know, do you find that that was a really important thing? Did that carry you through? Did that change your just general outlook? Did this whole experience kind of spin you around and put you in a different direction?
Yeah, it absolutely did. I was pretty spiritual, I guess, before, just because my family, they're kind of weird, and they started doing yoga in like 1982, whereas everyone else started doing it in like 2005. So I was always familiar with meditation, and they have a pretty rich spiritual lives themselves, although we're not particularly religious. And then in my illness, I just kind of lost touch with anything. Like I've always been really into astrology. And at one point I remember being like, that's complete bullshit. I'm dying. Like, I don't want to think about the planets. Like I would get emails through and I'd be like, no, this is not real. Although I've done a 180 on that again, because I'm really into astrology.
She's again. Back, baby.
I'm back. I'm back. But it's funny because I lost touch with it, and then I'd like really feel so connected to a power greater than myself, and feel like a real sense of purpose and a real sense of being held by something that I don't know what that is, but because I still don't, I sort of see it in nature. I have lots of different ways that I connect to my own spirituality. And then in the really dark moments, I was like, none of this matters. And then I'd come back to it. So it's like a real ebb and flow. And I think it's natural to feel that way when you're faced with death multiple times, and also just the physical trials of being constantly prodded and having multiple procedures, and your body feeling so at the mercy of the medical system. So, you know, it's been a journey for sure. And now I feel like my spiritual life is richer than ever. And I have a real solid practice. I practice meditation every day. I teach meditation. I teach breath work. It's very much weaved into my life in a way that I don't see it going away anytime soon. And I lean on it for support and guidance. And, you know, people would give me, there's that Viktor Frankl book, Man's Search for Meaning. And I think like 3 separate people gave it to me. And if you're not familiar with that book, it's written by a Holocaust survivor. And he writes about this, like how can you find meaning within something so dark, you know, what he went through. And there were times where I really didn't find any meaning. And I was like, this is too much for anyone to be able to hold and bear. Again, my social worker, she had such a massive impact on my life. There were moments where I had nothing left in the tank for trying to believe that things would be okay. When I was, you know, on my 5th setback and with C. diff and other viruses, and having to just deal with all these things that I didn't expect to happen. And she said to me, you know, I know you don't believe it right now, but I'm going to believe it for you. And I'm going to believe it for you until it comes true. And that really helped me. And then I really needed people who could sit with me in the pain and feel like shit and be like, this is terrible. What's happened to you is not fair. And you are allowed to feel like it's not fair, because the toxic positivity thing can be really detrimental. I had someone say to me, like, why are you crying? Someone in the hospital, why are you crying? Your tears should be joyful. Your tears should be, you should be grateful. And so that's where the line is, because often I think we tell sick people, No, you just need to be grateful for what you have. You need to be okay with this situation.
Because it could always be worse. Like there's always someone worse off, blah,
yes.
blah, blah.
And especially when it comes to specifically transplant, and so much gratitude to my donor, someone has to die for you to be able to live. And that's a lot to grapple with. But it doesn't mean that you have to be grateful to the point of not.
Well, it goes back to what you were saying before, that like, what are you going to live your entire life in a nun's costume because
exactly
this happened?
Yeah. Or locked away. We can talk about immunosuppression, and I will on the show, but I really thought that I would like never be able to take the subway again. And I didn't for 2 years. And I didn't think that I could be in a crowded place. I mean, it's all kind of funny to talk about this stuff with COVID, but
it was radical at the time. It
was totally radical. I was ahead of my time. But yeah, it's a fine line. And I think it's something that we need to have more conversations around when it comes to the patient experience, because sure, your life can be saved and that's great. But to tell people that they need to blindly be happy for it doesn't make any sense, because it doesn't line up with what the intricacies of trauma actually is in the body. It really doesn't always feel like that.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of something. It's not black and white. It just lives in the gray.
Yeah. And I think also just it helps to make light of your situation and just power through, right? Like it helps to just laugh about the horrible things that can happen to you in the hospital, but it also you really need to cry about it, because it's too much sometimes, for too much too soon. And people are told, I know from my own experience and from other people's experience, people are told when they're crying in the hospital that they should stop, or they get a psych consult called on them, and it makes no sense. So yeah, it's complicated. There's no one straightforward answer to it.
So did you feel like a burden of like having to carry that when you're not fine yourself?
I think it depends on the person, and it depends on, what it was. I think sometimes, like, my mother had a lot of emotions that I had no time for. And it's complicated because mothers and daughters are complicated.
And she's the closest to you.
Yes.
And the closest to the situation.
Yes. And she had to witness it on a level that no one else did.
Beyond what you did. Like, you'll never see her perspective.
Absolutely.
So like
not. And we
stuff
definitely
that
don't see eye to eye.
Again, that's a different podcast. But, she experienced things that, I mean, we talked about it before, like her own trauma associated with seeing those staples, seeing you when you didn't even see yourself.
Yeah. And also the waiting, it was like a 10-hour surgery, having to sit and wait for everyone. I know that people were like on the edge of their seat wondering if I was going to
drama was high.
Be alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely felt annoyed. I think the word would be annoyed sometimes, that people felt like their emotion was important when it just wasn't. And it felt like a burden to me. But people were mostly respectful. Like I would have people come in and visit me. I had lots of visitors, which was great. And I could often see like how intense it was for them. Like, How was it for you when you would come visit me?
Terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible. I mean, also because we talked about this, it happened in an instant.
Yeah.
Like this was not some like prolonged illness. You get used to someone. It was like you went from dropping 50 pounds to being like a skeleton, to then being, you had so much water.
Mm-hmm.
Your body was like ripping open. The biggest staples I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah, it was wild.
Absurd.
Yeah.
And that's crazy. And again, for someone who's insanely emotional, was terrible.
Yeah. But what I remember for the most part was that I could kind of see people holding it in. I remember one time my friend Bettina came to see me, and she had just come from the airport. She came straight from the airport to see me with her suitcase, and she was like wearing this really cute little outfit with like little shorts. She's like such a pocket rocket. And she comes into the room, and speaking of spirituality, I had my shaman who I used to work for.
You had everyone. I feel like it's important.
I had everyone.
We had like literally, if you thought that you spoke to God, come on in.
Oh my God.
You are welcome.
I had every sect, every religious person. I had every type of healer come in and try to help me. And they did. And so he was there, and he was just coming to see me. He wasn't necessarily doing any sort of healing, but he had just come to see me. He was my friend. I used to work for him. And she comes in, and I get up to say hello. And at that time, I had tubes coming out of both sides of me and filling up these bags of blood, basically.
Yep.
Yeah. So it was pretty shocking to see anyway. But they hadn't come to change the bags for a while. So I get up to say hello to Bettina.
Oh, no.
And Itzhak is his name. He was standing there, and he also didn't really, it's not like he was that familiar with this situation either. So he had a look of shock on his face too. When I stand up and one of the bags bursts and there's blood all over me, all over the floor. Luckily, my other friend Karina was there, and she's the occupational therapist, and she like jumped too, and so did my mother, and everybody helped me clean it up. But Bettina's there in her like cute little outfit with her suitcase just from like, I don't know, she's somewhere in Europe, and she's like, the first time she's seeing me, look of shock on her face. It's actually like look of shock on his face, and I'm just standing there like, nice to see you.
Yeah, this is our reality.
Yeah, and they're holding it in, you know, and I there are lots of times where I think people didn't expect necessarily for it to look so shocking or be so shocking, and didn't burden me with their emotions. And then sometimes they did, and it just it did feel like a burden, but it was also such a ridiculous situation that how people are just going to act the way they're going to act. But there were some dramatic moments for sure with people.
I think this podcast is so important because it kind of reminds me of like, you don't know any of this stuff. You don't know what it takes to have a baby until your friend has a baby and is like telling you all the details that you would never talk about.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of just like coming to your hospital room with no again, we were so young with no concept. It was just kind of like, here's fuzzy pajamas and just like stuff that at that point, like you could fit into fuzzy pajamas. Like you were in a gown with tubes and, you know, it's that sort of thing where people are just so uneducated about, how to be a patient for one, like the what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then also how to kind of just like go through it from the outside of just what that person is going through. Like your Starbucks gift card,
absolutely
doesn't go so far.
What do people need?
Yeah.
And how do they need you to show up for them? And what does the patient experience actually look like? And that's exactly why I'm doing this show, because I think it's different for everyone too, right? Like going back to that humanity, everybody has their own experience and they're human. So they're going to have a different experience from me to the next person to the next person. But the important thing is to talk about it and have these conversations so people feel less alone. Because I felt really alone. Even though I had so much community around me, I felt so singular and terminally unique. And I'm absolutely not. There's so many people out there who have had similar experiences and continue to. By the way, you and some other people at The Tonight Show gave me a Forever 21 sweater that I still wear to this day. So that was pretty good.
See, that sounds ridiculous. Like talking about it now, we were like, what does she need? A Forever 21 sweater? So why don't we talk about, the biggest takeaway here, which is the donor list. Yes. Something that neither of us, put stock into. until this whole thing happened. What do we need to know about it? Why is it so important? I mean, obviously, but why don't we talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, the number might be different, so I may correct myself, but I'm pretty sure that there are 112,000 people on the waiting list right now for organs in the US. It's a huge problem. 17 people die every day from not receiving organs that could save their lives. It could be fixed basically tomorrow, but of course we know that that's not how things work, because right now it's an opt-in system. So people have to sign up for it and give consent in order to be an organ donor. If it was an opt-out system, it would be a much better situation. They switched to that in the UK, and the organ donor list went way down. Of course, you need to notify your family members, because if for whatever reason your family members aren't notified of it at the time of your death, they'll basically have the final say. It's an issue that isn't really talked about, because I think transplant kind of freaks some people out. They think it's kind of science fiction-y. It's like someone else's organ is in your body. Like,
well, also to come to terms with it, you're dead.
Yeah.
And that's scary.
And it's scary.
Because you're now thinking, a young person is saying like, gee, I hope I don't die, but I guess you can have these if I'm dead.
Exactly. So you have to think about your own death, so it feels scary. But the cool thing is that it's so easy. You just put it on your license.
So
it's
easy.
Really
it looks
easy.
Very cool.
It looks great. I would not be alive if I didn't have an organ donor. I was so lucky to receive the organ that I did at the time that I did. It's actually a complete miracle, because organs don't come up that easily, especially livers.
And successfully.
Yeah, exactly. And because my liver wasn't a perfect match, and it could have been, that's part of why I had so many setbacks. But it's a huge gift that you can give people, and it's so easy, and you can't take it with you. And it's a flawed system right now. So if you have the information around it and you're able to take some action and just sign up, you're saving a life. You can save up to 8 lives with, they use your eyes as well. So
I think that for a while there was that like rumor going around that they're not going to try to save you.
Oh,
if
yeah.
You're in,
yeah.
Just.
No, they take an oath. They have to try to save your life.
It's like their whole deal.
Yeah. They have to try to save your life. Don't worry. They will still save your life.
I thought it was important to throw that in.
That's good, because people will think like, oh, I'm just being harvested for organs. Apparently that's a rumor.
What can people expect from the future? Like what kind of people are you going to talk to? What are the topics that you hope to touch upon? And what do you kind of hope that people get out of this about you, about the topic, just like in general? Yeah.
So this season, I'm speaking to some really cool people. I am interviewing a poet who has lupus. I'm speaking to a mother of 2 whose son had cancer as a baby and went into remission. And then she was recently diagnosed with breast cancer, and she's a writer, and she writes really beautifully about her experience. I'm speaking to another writer who started a fashion magazine who has ME. And each person that I'm speaking to has either a chronic illness or a disability, has had a serious surgical intervention, but they have a creative practice that they channel that experience into, and it shows the full spectrum of their humanity. I'm so excited about the people I'm speaking to, because they really don't hold back in terms of seeing that they have this certain experience of being sick, of having a disability, and not allowing it to detract from their humanity and putting it into their work. And it's really cool, and it's really inspiring. And the whole goal of this show is to show that that's a possibility, but you don't have to do anything in order to show the full spectrum of your humanity when you're sick. You don't have to necessarily be creating, but it's just interesting that so many people are moved to. So that's what we're doing this season. And I hope to have many, many conversations with lots of different types of people all over the world. And thanks to COVID, it's really possible that I can just speak to people everywhere.
Also, what's really important, and something that, we're trained at an early age to stay away from, it's just feeling uncomfortable. Whether you're the patient, whether you're the friend, sitting in uncomfortableness is the worst. But it is integral to this whole process, whether you're hearing about the transplant itself, like the medical things that you went through, having to be so vulnerable, or just listening to like the ripple effect and how terrible that was. Just sitting with that, I think, can be hard, but I also think it's really important.
Yeah. It's 100% of what I'm trying to do is like, what is it that makes you feel so uncomfortable? And let's talk about it, because odds are another person feels the same way. So thank you for bringing that in. Okay, well, thank you to Christine Cestaro for being my interview guest, for asking me about all the ins and outs of my liver transplant, and I will see you next time. That was our show, So Life Wants You Dead. Thank you so much for listening. Special thanks to Christine Cestaro, who took time out of her busy life to make the treacherous journey from Long Island to Brooklyn. She's one of the most talented people I know and always shares so generously of herself. Since this particular episode is about me, I'd also like to thank my friends, family, and colleagues, as well as the medical professionals who helped me through that particular time of my life that wanted me dead, and for everything in between. This episode was made in collaboration with and support from Soho House. Many thanks to Jamila Brown, Min Shrimpton, Olivia Garrity, Sagal Mohammed, Erica Bonet, and Teo Vanderbroeke. Our editing is by the amazing Olive Olin. Our illustrations are by the extremely talented Renee Fagan. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe, leave us a review, or rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you don't have anything nice to say, go have a snack instead, as the old saying goes. Rating us and subscribing really makes a difference. You can find us on Instagram at So Life Wants You Dead. Thanks so much, and see you next time.